This webinar is going to summarize the key steps county prevention planning stakeholders can use to engage meaningfully with data, from identifying what data might be most valuable to collecting new information, analyzing information from various sources, and synthesizing it into meaningful data stories. So let me tell you just a little bit about our speakers. You might have seen these names before. We're very excited to introduce you to both of them. First, I'd like to introduce you to Katie Albright. I have a little snippet I'd like to read here. So Katie joined Safe and Sound in 2007 when it was named the San Francisco Child Abuse Prevention Center. Her prior experiences include San Francisco Deputy City Attorney representing our public schools, San Francisco Education Fund Policy Director, leading a campaign to improve teacher quality and increase student retention, and Preschool California Co-Director of Policy and Outreach Campaigning statewide for Universal Preschool. Katie actively serves on local and national nonprofit and government boards and commissions. She's received an Ascend Fellowship from the Aspen Institute and Social Entrepreneurship Fellowship at Stanford University. And Katie is a Georgetown University Law Center and Williams College graduate with honors. I'd also like to introduce you to Paul. Paul Collier has led Co-Effect since 2016 and has consulted with over 35 for impact clients across Colorado, California, and Washington, D.C. Paul has also led trainings around impact measurement strategy for hundreds of nonprofit professionals through the Colorado Nonprofit Association, Nonprofit Learning Lab, and Social Venture Partners Denver. Prior to Co-Effect, Paul served as the Data and Evaluation Manager at Safe and Sound, a leading family resource center developing a data-informed model to help families raise thriving kids. He also worked for Protiviti, an international consulting firm providing internal audit services to Fortune 500 clients. So with that, we want to say to the both of you, we're so grateful and excited for this discussion today, and we look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Super glad to be here with y'all. I'm Paul. So as Jessica mentioned, we're here to talk about the data playbook for prevention action planning. And so the next slightly less than 90 minutes are going to really walk you through this resource. And our hope today is that even if you've never had the chance to read through this guide, you'll walk away knowing some of the key strategies, some of the insights from this resource that you can apply in your own prevention planning efforts. So here's how we're going to use our time today. We're starting off with just a little bit of background. Why was Safe and Sound involved in this project? Why was I involved in this project? Giving you kind of the context of how we came up with this resource. And then we'll really talk about the data playbook and the big ideas therein. So we have three main sections of this. The first is around really planning for success with using data, and how do you identify the right data points and put them into context in a way that will serve your prevention plan efforts well. The second is exploring different strategies to engage your community. And this means both collecting data from your community and engaging them in helping you make sense of that data. And then the third is around telling your story with this data. So we'll end with some next steps, how to find the actual data playbook resource and how to get additional help. So as we kick this off, I actually wanted to just get everybody actively engaged. And I would love to hear, okay, so who in your prevention planning team is responsible for finding relevant community data? And so your poll should appear on your screen now. There's several different options which you can read. It could be a member of your planning, one member of your planning team, all members of your team, a subcommittee, a consultant, nobody. Maybe you haven't really started in or you aren't a part of this effort. So we'll give you all just a few more seconds, but really want to hear a little bit about who's involved in this sort of work for prevention planning in your own community before we go any further. This is actually really neat. I get to see these results in real time. So we'll give you all another maybe 15 seconds or so. And if you're the kind of person who said, Oh, it's somebody else. None of these options made sense. Just drop that in the chat. That helps us know a little bit about who's responsible for finding relevant community data in your community. Ashley, okay, that makes sense that you've got a team working on the local level and a consultant also supporting y'all. That seems to be pretty common from what I've observed as well. Okay, Jessica and Haley, if you don't mind, maybe let's close this poll and we can present this so that everybody can see this. Hopefully everybody can see this now. So a lot of folks are saying, hey, all members of our prevention planning team are responsible for finding community data. That's great, because that means that everybody on your team who's involved in this call will find some more resources that are helpful to them. There are so many different ways of structuring and breaking out responsibilities for prevention planning. I've seen a few permutations of it, but certainly not all. So none of these answers are wrong necessarily, but definitely be thinking about who holds this role for your community, because those are the people that should be accessing a resource like the Data Playbook. So I'll talk a little bit just about the background here. Who am I, why Safe and Sound, and just a little bit about myself. I was really involved in this because I was a member of the Safe and Sound team, and then I've been involved as the sort of project manager for the economics of abuse project that Safe and Sound has been running for a number of years. And so this all led us into working on the Data Playbook. So I really approached this project from being sort of an integral member of the Safe and Sound team, and then a consultant and sort of fractional member of the team. So with that, Katie, why don't I turn it over to you? I would love for you to share a bit more about Safe and Sound and how the organization got involved in this important work.
Absolutely, Paul, and thank you so much. I see, before I get started, I see that Mercedes Parker has her hand up, their hand up. Mercedes, would you, do you have a question? Do you want to put it in the chat? Do you want to, I just want to make sure we answer questions. And I see Haley put that in the chat. Okay, thanks so much. We'll change that setting. Really grateful that you are here. So Paul, again, thank you so much for all of your work, and we're truly honored that Caltrans has invited us to present on this playbook, and consider such an incredible partnership that we all have around planning for prevention in our own communities. Safe and Sound is a community-based organization based in San Francisco. We were formerly the San Francisco Child Abuse Prevention Center. And before that, 50 years ago, we were the Child Abuse Council. We were started by Dr. Moses Grossman, an incredible pediatrician working at a local public hospital, who said at that point in the early 70s, how as a community can we come together and protect children? The very first thing that he did was bring civic leaders together and create the Child Abuse Council. It actually preceded the law that now every county complies with, to have a Child Abuse Prevention Council. The very first thing that our council did was create a 24/7 phone support line, a warm line, to help parents and caregivers, because we know that parenting is tough. It's 24/7 and we all need help. And from there, really all of our programs have developed over the last 50 years. We run a family resource center. We continue to be the County Child Abuse Prevention Council for both San Francisco, and we co-partner in Marin with the Child Parent Institute. We're part of the Greater Bay Area Child Abuse Prevention Councils. We provide significant support to individual parents and caregivers through our Family Resource Center. We do a host of trainings at the community level, and we also have a good deal of work around systems change and policy development and advocacy, and that makes up all of our work. We co-partner with the county's Children's Advocacy Center as well to help children in our community and throughout the Bay Area. Several years ago, we wanted to really understand what it would take what was the cost, not just because we know that the cost at the individual level for child maltreatment is significant to both the child and the family, but what was the cost to our entire community? And we set out in partnership with Berkeley's Haas School of Business to calculate what the economic cost of maltreatment was to our community. That was in 2017. And since then, as Paul's indicated, we've continued to update that report really with an idea to give all of us tools in our own jurisdictions around prevention and prevention planning. Because if we understand how much it costs, because we know child abuse costs, but prevention pays. And if we could think about how to use these data to help inform our policymakers and inform our community, we could help investment in prevention. And so that project has grown from understanding what the economic impact is in San Francisco to the Bay Area to now every 58 counties in California is able to calculate its cost of maltreatment. And you can find that information by going on to economics/safe and sound. And we can provide that resource in our chat. If you go to the next slide, as I said, we've provided these interactive tools for every county and really a snapshot so that every county can be able to draw down a one-page document and really understand what their costs of child abuse are, whether or not it's related to child welfare, special education, long-term health matters, as well as justice, both juvenile justice and adult justice costs, as well as loss of productivity. And so you can see that in your snapshot, and hopefully that's a tool that can be meaningful to your own counties in terms of planning and prevention planning. I'll turn it to the next slide. But what we really wanted to do as a next step was think about how can we support teams, prevention planning teams, particularly as we all move into Families First Prevention Services Act planning. How can we support teams to understand and use data? And we come at this very much as practitioners who are grappling in our own jurisdiction in San Francisco and Marin and working around the greater Bay Area, grappling with our own jurisdictions of what data is important, how do we use it, how do we make change with the data that we're using. And so really in deep conversation with Paul, as you'll hear, he's an expert in this, was able to help us think about how do we train and educate and share knowledge with the rest of California. And so that's what this playbook is all about. If you can go to the next slide. We worked in partnership with the California Child Welfare Indicators Project and the Learning and Evaluation Bureau, as well as the Department of Public Health and CDSS. And we were able to do significant focus groups with the folks that you see on this slide, really trying to understand different jurisdictions' experiences. And all of those experiences went into the development of this comprehensive tool. So we are incredibly indebted to our partners. And on the slide, I think Shasta is a little covered up by the map, but we are incredibly indebted to our partners for helping us with this effort. And with that, I will turn it back over. I take that back. I have 2 more slides. To really understand why this is important, wanted to share a quotation from David Swanson Hollinger, who is in Ventura County, heads up their child welfare department. And I think what he says is so meaningful. I think it's about helping families before it gets to the child welfare system. We need leadership from our system, public, private partners, and community to support and strengthen families, to really understand how important it is and why we're doing this work. We have to ground this work around looking at data back in terms of families and supporting families. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that Roger DeLeon, who is a parent leader in California, talks about how important it is to be respectful, to understand the challenges that parents and caregivers face by collecting community level data, county planning efforts will have a better chance of keeping families safe and families together. And ultimately that is our goal. And so with that, I turn it over to Paul to really go into the data playbook and the nuts and bolts of how to use this very effective tool. And I will just say, as a last matter, thank you all so much for being partners in this work, because together we can help strengthen families and end child abuse and neglect. Thank you so much. And Paul, turn it over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate your grounding this in the work. You know, we're doing this not for data's sake, but for the sake of the families in our communities. And so just really appreciate that reminder as we now think about what is in this data playbook and how might we apply it to our day-to-day or to our sort of week-to-week, month-to-month prevention planning. So here's the outline, y'all. We have 3 sections, as I described before. And so we'll be progressing through these. So, you know, starting in the first section around planning for success, we want to talk about, making the case for using data in prevention planning, guessing that y'all probably already care about that if you decided to take time out of your day to be here. Building data leadership skills on your prevention planning team, selecting a framework that helps organize and make sense of this data, and then finding existing community data. So if y'all are ready with that, let's dive in. So talking about chapter 1, planning for success. One of the foundational things that we heard when we were developing this data playbook is that there are some mindsets, some skills that aren't incredibly complicated, but are very foundational for engaging with data well in terms of prevention planning. So we wanted to highlight, I think, a few of those here. One of those is how do we understand different potential uses for data? So when we're thinking about prevention planning, we're thinking about a data for planning use case. And there's this really great white paper the Center for the Study of Social Policy put out in 2020. And these are the folks that issued the 5 protective factors. I know that y'all are very familiar with those. They outlined a difference between data for planning and data for adaptation, where data for planning is an exercise in really trying to use information to understand the problem, the context that any problem is situated in, and then potential solutions to that problem. And that's just contrasted with sort of data for adaptation use cases. So when we're using data to adapt something that already exists, often we're curious about information about the implementation of that thing, the consequences or the outcomes of that thing, and then the longer term impact of that thing. So I wanted to present this distinction here because for many of us, I know at least for me, a lot of my work sits within the sort of what we would call evaluation space. This is a data for adaptation use case. We're curious about, are we doing the things we intended and what are the outcomes? I want to contrast that with the task that we're called to accomplish here in our prevention planning teams, where we're creating long-term plans for communities, envisioning a different, better future for our communities. And so we're talking about a data for planning task. We really need to understand the nature of the problems our communities are facing, the context in terms of what our community looks like, and understanding potential solutions for that. The reality is that every one of your communities is already doing some stuff to prevent child maltreatment and to make sure that families really have the best chance for raising healthy children. So there's sort of a gray area or a mix of these two things, but knowing that there are differences in these two different uses of data really helps us understand what's the kind of task that we're taking on when we're using data for prevention planning. So another thing that the data playbook explores, and I want to touch on here, are some just fundamental, I'll call these data leadership skills. These are skills and an awareness of certain things that your prevention planning team members really should have, and many of them probably already do have, to really make use of data. So one of those important skills that we heard time and again when we talked with different prevention planning teams that were effective was folks know how to integrate data into decisions. Even if it's just saying, okay, we've got a decision to make, what's the relevant data that we should be looking at and what does that data say? just knowing that you should be looking for data that can integrate into your decisions is a really important step. And that is the fundamental leadership skill we're talking about here. There's also an associated set of skills really around understanding data products. So these are, when we talk about sort of data literacy, this is what we're talking about. You know, asking good questions like, where does this data come from? Can I trust it? How can I use it? Those questions, having those skills can be super helpful because you want all of your prevention planning team members to be savvy consumers of data. So then there are a few things that it's probably important to have an awareness of as prevention planning team members. So we talked about data for planning versus adaptation. There's a really helpful graphic in the data playbook around how data contributes to information, which contributes to knowledge, which contributes to wisdom. You know, there's sort of a fundamental truth that if you have bad or questionable data, you cannot create good knowledge, you cannot generate insights from bad underlying information. And so data quality becomes really, really important. And then finally, the data playbook explores just some common biases that influence how all individuals interpret data. And we can't get rid of these biases, but we should be able to know how to navigate them. Okay, Ashley, so I see a comment here. So what has been confusing is that now that the CPP template has been released, there isn't anything mentioned about the frameworks. Is this something that will be more relevant farther along in the planning? Thanks for any clarity. Ashley, if you're talking about data frameworks, you know, that's something that isn't asked for explicitly within the comprehensive prevention plan. But the comprehensive prevention plan does ask, what data do you have about your community? And I'm badly paraphrasing this, but how does that data inform your prevention plan? And so the frameworks help you really understand what data points are important, what data points should we be looking at. The truth is you could look at, you know, 1,001 different data points about your community, and doing so could mire you and your prevention planning team, so that you never actually get to the planning part of the process. So the reason that we talk about data frameworks here, and I'll talk about that in a second, is that it helps, I think, more efficiently move through the process of what data should we look at that should help really inform our decisions. Does that answer your question, Ashley? And sorry, if I misinterpreted that, please also let me know. Okay, awesome. Thank you for asking that. I totally appreciate that. And so let's get into that because Ashley, you queued us up for the very next slide. So one of the important parts in setting your team up for success is selecting a data framework. This is essentially a framework that comes from research, that is trusted, that helps you organize your data in a credible way. And so actually an important step in using data in your community is sort of picking, okay, what framework should we use to organize this? Because then that helps us determine what data points we should be looking at. And the utility of this actually came, you know, from several existing prevention planning teams where they started realizing, oh gosh, you know, all these data points we're looking at, it's almost like we're throwing spaghetti against a wall. We don't have an organizing principle for the data that we're looking at. And so it really became clear through some of my discussions with folks who are doing this work around the state, having some kind of framework that says, here is the data that's important to help us understand our community can really be helpful in this process. And so the data playbook really outlines pros and cons of 4 different common frameworks, and each of these have been used by prevention planning teams. So the first, social determinants of health. The second, the 5 protective factors from CSSP's protective factors framework. The third is the building community resilience model. And then the fourth is the adverse community experiences and resilience framework. And so today, we're not going to step through each of those different frameworks. They're all really interesting, and I bet that you're familiar with several of these already. But I want to just provide an example of one of those and how that then translates to what data should we be looking at to understand our community. So in practice, a lot of folks are using the social determinants of health or the 5 protective factors. I would say those appear to be maybe the most known of these frameworks. So I want to use a different example. So this adverse community experiences and resilience framework. It essentially says, and these are all well researched, the researchers that created this said there appear to be 3 domains that really influence positive or adverse community experiences. The first domain is equitable opportunity. This is sort of the economic domain, if you will. The second domain is place. So the built environment and what surrounds us physically. And then the third domain is people, so the social environment. So if we said, okay, this is a framework that we feel like we can use to organize data about our community, when we look at each of these domains, in the equitable opportunity domain, we might be looking at data points like households under 200% of poverty, unemployment rate, rates of savings and wealth building, business investment, perceptions of opportunity. And notice within these, and the data playbook sort of outlines this, you want to have both indicators of maybe community challenge, but indicators of community strength. And it's important to understand not only sort of data that is generated from normal activities, but also perceptions. How are people feeling about this? Oftentimes there can be disconnects between how do your community members feel about opportunity and what the actual sort of nature of opportunity is in your community. So consider, strengths and areas for improvement or opportunity, kind of the hard data, and then the perception kind of data as you're thinking through this. So the people domain, when we're using this framework, we might be looking at things like family composition, access to healthcare, child maltreatment rates may sit within here. Perception of trust, perception of agency, social norms, any data that you can get around sense of culture and sense of identity might relate to this part of this framework. And then around place, here you might be looking at housing availability, home ownership rates, quality and quantity of public spaces, crime rates, perceptions of safety. So what this does is, by choosing a framework, we might go from 1,001 potential pieces of data that we could be looking at to narrowing in on, maybe we're talking about 15 or 20 metrics about our community that help come together and give us a pretty holistic understanding of important factors that influence the safety and success of our families in our location, in our community where we're doing our work and where we're making our prevention plans. So I've been doing some talking now. I would love for y'all to share, what data sources have you and your prevention planning team found to be valuable? And use data sources broadly, but put this in the chat and just name one. But if there's one data source that you and your prevention plan team have found to be valuable, I'd love for y'all to share that with us here before we go into sharing what we found in the data playbook about different data sources. Sue, Kids Count, awesome. The census, Casey Family, absolutely. I see a few of these. Oh, eddata.org, that's a new one for me, Diana. Awesome. CCWIP, I'm familiar with that one, absolutely. Any others? Absolutely, the American Community Survey. Oh, I've heard about Weldorado.org. Actually, really great things about that. That's awesome that you're using that, Jamie. Cool. California Healthy Kids Survey. Beautiful. All right. And keep them coming too. If anybody else has something that comes to mind for them, sharing that in the chat is actually can be really helpful for everybody else here as well. Who Cares by Imprint. Diana, if you want to just share a little bit about what is that? I think that's helpful for everybody else to know. So thank y'all. I really appreciate this. It's great to hear this. And the nice thing is, there are some of these new things that are coming out, and sometimes it takes a while for knowledge of various things to also come out. Diana, National Account of Foster Homes and Families, Who Cares by Imprint. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome. So in the data playbook, we wanted to share a top 10 list of existing sources for community data. And the good thing is many of the sources that y'all have already shared in the chat are on here. So you're already on exactly the right track. We ordered these in sort of an order of utility. So several of you mentioned, hey, the Casey opportunity map, we found that to be really useful. That was actually the first source that we listed because it's pretty comprehensive. It's relatively easy to use. And it covers a lot of the data points that you might be looking at or might be curious about for your prevention plan. So, so I've been advocating for folks maybe go there first and then complement that source with other sources that we list here. Just so you know, we kind of started with a much longer list. And through the process of researching the data playbook, we narrowed it down by the following categories. So one, we needed to make sure that these data sources were updated at least annually. It's updated on a regular basis. We don't have extremely old data. Two, that it is credible information, that we're not just, kind of taking a poll of 10 people across the state, but we've got a really, kind of strong basis for it. And then, we wanted to really kind of look through this and make sure that it was, these are sources that are accessible. Like the third piece was that each of these, I could see a person without data training interfacing with it. And there are a lot of other data sources that are more nuanced and more in depth, but they can be very frustrating to use. So we were really trying to strike a balance of, timeliness, relevance, and easy to use for you all to be able to access. So it sounds like many of you have already used and are familiar with Casey Opportunity Map. So I'll give you a really brief update of these other ones. The Prosperity Now scorecard is a really great source for economic information. Family income and assets, community economic trends. They've really focused in the economic sort of well-being area. Several of you mentioned U.S. Census, particularly the American Community Survey, and that's a really important point because the American Community Survey tends to it's conducted on an ongoing basis, and so you tend to get somewhat fresher, more recent data, and it also goes in more depth. So there's a tool here, the American Community Survey Narrative Profile is the tool I would point you towards. There are other different American Community Survey tools, but that one really easily describes, aspects of the American Community Survey data for each county. All you have to do is plug your county name in, and it gives you this nice write-up about the demographic data and also health insurance information about your county. So fourth tool here, kids data. There's a lot of great kid-specific indicators about school safety, childcare, et cetera. The Strong Start Index, number 5, if you haven't seen it, it creates one summary metric, so the index, that describes how well positioned is a child born in this particular location to have a healthy childhood, to have a strong start, if you will. And they combine a bunch of different data sources. The cool thing is it's very targeted geographically, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about maps. So the Children Now County Scorecard is great because they have some strong built-in visualizations of their data. So you can pull up your county there and get graphs made for you, which is oftentimes really nice if you don't want to spend your whole day in Excel or PowerPoint creating a nice graph. Some of y'all mentioned California Child Welfare Indicators Project, CCWIP, is kind of our go-to source for up-to-date statewide child welfare data. And Katie and I have been using this for years for the Economics of Abuse project. That's our main source for understanding what is the scale of child maltreatment in any given community. And so speaking of our website, we're listing that on there. The unique thing that the Economics of Abuse interactive website gives you is a quantification of the economic impact of child maltreatment. So we have the California Health and Human Services County Health Status Profile. So this pulls in a number of different health specific indicators, including maternal health, which is really important for many of our prevention planning teams. And then last but not least, there's this tool called Policy Map. This isn't a California specific, it's a national resource, but they have almost every other data point under the sun. So if there is a community data point, it's collected regularly by some entity, some government entity generally, but isn't available anywhere else on here, Policy Map is probably a place that you can find that. So wanted to share, we talked about the data frameworks. We wanted to talk about some of the different data sources. Let's pause now. Does anybody have any questions about any of the things that we've talked about in this section of the data playbook around planning for success? Okay, y'all, I'm hearing none. Honestly, if you've got questions about anything throughout, put them in the chat. I try to monitor this, and we'll also sort of pause at the end of each section for other questions related to this. If you want more depth, go to the data playbook. What we're trying to do here is give you an overview that's enough to be actionable, so that saves you the time of reading the resource, but also gives you a sense for where in the data playbook might be a nugget, might be a strategy, a technique that will really help your team move forward. So the data playbook has a lot more depth about all of this stuff. Definitely advise you to go there, and you are welcome to just hone right into the chapter that's most relevant for your work at this time. So far we've been talking about a lot of the work that your prevention planning team itself is doing to find data, to organize data, to understand the information that helps you create your prevention plan and describe that to others. So let's now talk about how do we engage our community beyond the prevention planning team. So chapter 2 of our data playbook is all around engaging your community, and we have a section around collecting new community data, as well as sections around analyzing this data. And we put that analysis in the community engagement part of this playbook, because we think that is critical, that you engage folks who have various kinds of lived experience in your community in analyzing your data. Everybody brings their own worldview, their own history to any data analysis task. And there's some ways that you can make that fun. You can make it engaging. So definitely think about that part of your process as a way of engaging your community. So let's start first, though, with collecting new community data. And I wanted to just go into this, talking a little bit about the risks. If not all prevention planning teams choose to collect some of their own unique data. So, you found community data that already exists. You probably realize, oh, there are some gaps here. There's some parts of the framework, our data framework, that we cannot find really good data for. We need to go out and collect that. Before you take that step, think about the following risks. And this isn't an argument not to collect new data. You just want to do it really thoughtfully. So the first risk is representativeness. And when we're going out to our community to collect new information, we want it to be representative of actual community members, and we acknowledge we're not going to hear from everybody. So for the subset of people we hear from, are they representative of the community as a whole, or the parts of the community we care about? That is often really tough. Even if you get enough response to have a representative sample of your whole community, often we're talking about really focusing our work on families that are marginalized in a particular way, and we may not have enough representation of them. What's really important here is just be honest with yourself about who is included and who is excluded from any kind of data collection activity. And keep that in mind. Keep those weaknesses in mind when you're reviewing that data. That kind of thought process is really critical, and probably stronger than any kind of formal sampling methodology, in terms of really helping you know and understand how representative the data that you collect is. So you don't need to sort of always strive for 100% representative data to use that data. Just know who's included, who's excluded, whose voice isn't represented in this, and hold that knowledge alongside the actual results that you get. So the second point is accessibility. Q&A. I see this. For someone who is new to the field, what is the best resource that we can use to help us plan our prevention strategy best? Oh, that's interesting. here we're kind of talking about use of data for prevention planning. I'm wondering, I don't know if Caltrin or Katie, if any of y'all might have, from the perspective of somebody who's sat in on, this prevention planning activity, you have any response or thoughts to that question?
That's a very interesting question. I'm curious if the person is from California, because obviously all jurisdictions around the country who have opted into the prevention section of the Families First Prevention Services Act are doing prevention planning. I would say that there's a couple different ways of thinking about this work. First is if you are doing it for Families First Prevention Services Act, there is, depending on your jurisdiction, Transitional Act funding for it, and work closely with your child welfare department, your Title 4E department, in terms of thinking about how maybe there's some consultants that are available to work with. There's some national consultants that are doing supporting jurisdictions with prevention planning, as well as more local folks. And I'm happy to provide names if that's helpful and I can put my email in the chat and even connect you with some consultants. The other is thanks, Lisbeth. The other is reaching out to your child abuse prevention council. Again, every jurisdiction under the capital legislation is required to have a child abuse prevention council. And every council is most likely working on prevention planning. And councils are made up of, they can be either government run, nonprofit run, and they are made up of civic leaders and experts in the field and practitioners and parents and caregivers and those with lived experiences, depending on the jurisdiction. And I actually would use this data playbook as a way to start. Paul will get into some of the components around having a data party. You'll hear about that in a few minutes. And I would start collecting the data, and based on the data, develop the plan. And so, Paul, I think that's probably a good segue into thinking about how you're informing people around the community data playbook. But Lisbeth, I'll put my email in the chat and happy to connect you with specific consultants if that's helpful.
Yeah. And Katie, as you were talking, I was just realizing too that I think Caltrin has other they've done so many other prevention planning related webinars. And so Elizabeth, if you haven't checked some of those out, I think that there's a really nice library, of resources on the Caltrin website as well. That might be helpful here. Definitely important for you to know about. It's so interesting that I almost wonder at this point, the harder thing is actually knowing exactly where to start and how to navigate your way through, all of these resources. So one of the reasons we created the data playbook was to help you navigate your way through the data collection and use part of this process. So we were talking about collecting new community data. So if your prevention planning team chooses to collect new data, just keep in mind the risk of representativeness. Accessibility is another one. You want to meet folks where they're at. You want to make participation easy. Fatigue is a third risk to think about. So a lot of different organizations reach out to families experiencing some kind of marginalization or some kind of challenge and ask them for data. And so you want to know what other data collection activities reaching similar families have happened recently. And ideally you get to use some of their data, but at least, understanding that landscape allows you to thoughtfully ask for new data without risking too much community member survey fatigue. And then the fourth piece is trust. So any data collection activity requires a little bit of trust for folks to engage with you. So if you are not working at an entity that interfaces directly with community members, you may want to partner with an entity that has the trust of community members or several different entities and have their trust sort of help vouch for the data collection endeavor so that you can hear from families and then actually encourage them to build trust with those partners and with your organization by taking action based on the data that they share with you. So Dana, thank you so much, by the way, for sharing that link in there. So we mentioned most prevention planning teams collect some kind of new additional data. There are a whole bunch of different ways to do this. They range from key informant interviews, focus groups, surveys are really common, community meetings. Asset mapping is actually a strategy, a particular kind of data collection and analysis activity written into the comprehensive prevention plan. Photo voice, community cafes, these are other options. So the data playbook goes through each of these, provides pros and cons for each of these, and also provides kind of a curated, what is the one best resource that we found that gives you a step-by-step guide. So if you're a person who does this work all the time, you already know this. If you are a person who has never run a data collection exercise before, go to the data playbook and use that to help you narrow into what kind of data collection we should do and how to actually execute that. We really wanted to design it to focus your attention on an easy to use guide for how to do any of these things well. So here's another opportunity. I want to hear from y'all. We've got a poll. So curious at this point, who in your prevention planning team is responsible for reviewing relevant community data, for actually looking at that data, trying to understand what it means, use it for making decisions. So that poll should have popped up. Again, you have a few choices: one member, multiple members, a consultant, a subcommittee. So I wanted to give you just a few minutes. Drop in your thoughts here, and then we will discuss and use that to inform the rest of our conversation. Caltrin team, thank you for reading my mind about the library of resources and recordings, by the way. So let's give everybody, I'm seeing about 55% participation. If we get that up to about 70%, let's close this poll here. I'm seeing a lot of this coming in, and it's not surprising to me that a lot of folks say, yeah, we're all responsible for looking at our relevant community data. Okay, I think that we're far enough here. We can call, as the AP would say, we can call the race. Let's share these results out to everybody. So y'all can see this. Most folks said all members of our planning team are responsible for reviewing community data, which makes a ton of sense. And we'll talk about what that actually can look like here in just a second. A subcommittee makes sense for a larger planning team as well. And there is no wrong answer, but I will say that engaging with data is, it's a team sport. You know, you want to have multiple people and perspectives looking at relevant community data and helping you make sense of that, helping you sort of ask the question, okay, what does this mean for our prevention plan? So as we're thinking about understanding community data, let's look at one aspect of analysis: disaggregating community data. So from many of the prevention plan teams we talked to, they said, you know, it's really critical for us to not just look at data for the county as a whole. If we're a county prevention plan team, we need to break this data apart. We need to look at subpopulations within our county to really understand what are the needs of the different groups, because our county in any part of California isn't one homogeneous population. We have a lot of diversity. We need to understand that diversity. So your steps for disaggregating community data are outlined in the data playbook, and we really outline these into 4 phases. The first is just prioritizing. You know, every county has a little bit different population makeup, and you want to think, okay, what subgroups of families in our community experience life differently? And so here you might think of race and ethnicity, age, sex, gender, location, immigration status, tribal status. Again, this will differ from county to county. You want to sort of prioritize which subpopulations are fairly large, and you have reason to believe, based on your lived experience our county in different ways. And so prioritizing those allows you to focus your time and attention, because it can be really hard to disaggregate your data based on all of these dimensions. But if you focus, then you can go to the next step, which is thinking, okay, which of these really important dimensions are in the data sources that we have. In other words, can we actually disaggregate or break apart our data by these dimensions? And many of the tools that we talked about in the last section actually do have some of that data alongside it, but some of them don't. And so you want to just be thoughtful of what can we disaggregate by. And when you're collecting new community data, you want to really ask this question of yourself first. If we want to understand the results of our community survey by age or by family composition or by immigration status, you need to ask those questions in a thoughtful way within that survey. So, so you prioritize, you assess, you actually go through the work of disaggregating, of analyzing your data, breaking out these different groups. And often this takes the form of individual work or having a small group, kind of do some of this initial analysis. The research suggests that you really want to try and look at the intersections of some of these different dimensions. This concept of intersectionality shows up in diversity, equity, and inclusion work all the time. Understanding each of us represent an intersection of multiple identities and and those identities are informed or influenced by, to a certain extent, our demographics, our location. So you want to think about the intersection of some of these things together if you can. And then finally, you review these. You try and summarize these visually. And in the data playbook, we identified different ways that are really strong approaches to visually representing disaggregated data. The data, once broken apart by race, for example, it can start looking a little bit confusing. We wanted to really show, here are some visual approaches to showing these different breakouts. So go to the data playbook and check those out there. So, so in terms of analyzing and engaging folks in analysis, you want to, disaggregate by relevant dimensions. It also makes sense to analyze your community data geographically, and this is where maps come in. So many prevention planning teams have really found it helpful to map your community data in some way. And a lot of the tools that we talked about before actually have maps built in. So the KC Family Programs Community Opportunity Map is a map. The Strong Start Index is what's shown here. And this also takes the form of a map. So I'm actually showing, when I was working with Katie at Safe and Sound on her staff, I lived in Berkeley, California, and I actually lived in this census tract that we're seeing right here. And so the great thing about the Strong Start Index is that it shows you the index by census tract by census tract. This is really a neighborhood by neighborhood look. And most of the data sources that we have don't get that specific. So real plug for this particular source. Many of the sources we talked about will map data. And if you have just raw data from a survey or from another source, the data playbook also outlines a number of different technology tools that allow you to pretty easily map that, and don't discount actually just printing out a map of your county and starting to draw on it and using that physical process. That is also totally fine. You don't have to use the most complicated technology solution for mapping if something a little simpler, more analog will help you all take a step forward. So the final sort of piece around engaging your community I want to emphasize is this sort of group process piece. So we really believe, I personally believe, and have seen from my own experience working with all different kinds of organizations, that making meaning from data is a team sport. So it's important to engage community members in reviewing community data. When we say community members, if your data is about adverse community experiences, you want to try and have some community members that are familiar with those adverse community experiences. Folks have experienced that for themselves. Have them in the room helping you understand that data about your community. So one strategy, and there are many ways of doing this, is to host a data party. And a data party is, just as it sounds, a one-time, try and make it fun event that is really designed to engage a group of people looking at data, interacting with it, asking questions of it, and helping you understand what this means. So in the playbook, we outline really a 6-step process for hosting this data party. And It starts with just knowing what you want to get out of it, identifying your objectives. There are many things that you can get out of a data party if it's knowing what data is important, getting community member recommendations on your plan, but you want to know what are the most important objectives. What's a win coming out of this? Then you invite your community members, you prepare this data for review, try and make it accessible, try and make it visual. Review that with folks at your data party, make sure there's space for discussion, make sure there's space for Q&A. Often it's helpful to give folks a little bit of one-on-one or small group time with their data before you come back together and you start talking about what does this mean, and really discuss. And of course, you want to follow up. You want to build trust with your community by saying, okay, we've heard you. Here are the things we're going to do. Here's how your perspective is influencing our prevention plan. So that's it in terms of engaging community. We have one more section to go, but before we do, I would love to just pause here. Any questions? Any questions that anybody has about what we've shared around engaging your community with data? Diana, you're welcome, by the way. That reminds me, one of the things that we're looking for, those 10 data sources, we said this has to cover all California counties. It can't just be for a particular metro area. So each of those 10 cover statewide. If there's anybody on this call who isn't in California, unfortunately, several of these, not all, but most of those are pretty California specific. Anybody else have any questions around engaging your community with data at this point? Okay, lovely. So we've got one more section, and this is the section around communication. So telling a story while using data. And this part of the data playbook is actually the shortest part of the data playbook, but one that we felt was really critical to touch on, because if you've gone through all of the work that we've talked about so far, you want to really make the most out of the data that you've collected. I will totally admit that kind of the minimum, the baseline for telling your story is your response in the comprehensive prevention plan. So, as we talked about before, that comprehensive prevention plan asks, what data did you review about your community and how does that inform your plan? So you're telling your story there for sure, but that probably shouldn't be the only place that you tell your story. So, we'll talk a little bit about additional strategies for telling a data-based story here. I am curious as we get into this. So how would you rate your prevention plan team's ability to communicate effectively with data? So let's launch this poll, and I'd love to hear, how confident folks are about their team's ability to communicate and use data here. And Haley and Jennifer, do we have this poll? And if not, cool, awesome. May have caught y'all off guard. Okay, so you should see a poll now. And you have a few answers, from very low to very high. Just be honest, honestly. I don't care, and I can't see who answered what. Awesome. Okay. We're over 50%. Give y'all just a couple of seconds. As we do, Jason, I will echo your sentiment around Caltrain. They have been just awesome to work with and super, super grateful to be here with y'all. Okay. Let's close. Why don't we close this poll, share the results out, so hopefully y'all can see this. And it looks like most folks said that we are moderate. Our team has a moderate ability to communicate effectively with data. So hopefully some of the things we'll talk about here might help you go from moderate to high. It's really encouraging to see some folks at very high. And I think if anybody ranks themselves as very low, especially if you've got any questions or, like a particular thing that you've been struggling with, put that in the chat, because we'll have time to talk about that a little bit here. So I really appreciate everybody sharing that. That's just great. And we're working from a place of strength here, and we're trying to maybe just improve our practice a little bit. But I think that that's going to really help. So this section really talks about data visualization, data communications, and data storytelling. So we're highlighting just a few of the fundamental principles in this presentation. There are some more fundamental principles explored in the data playbook. And so definitely encourage you to check that out. That also actually just has, this section in particular is really visual. We put a graphic designer through her paces in this section. So she helped us quite a bit in terms of, kind of presenting some of the different options and showing, examples of good visualization. So the first sort of principle in terms of data communications, use color intentionally. So good data communications often starts with a basis of grays. You want to use color to focus attention to particular areas. So first of all, you want to use graphs, you want to use visualization because that tends to stick, that tends to get people to pay attention. When you do, don't go overboard on the colors. Use grays for some of the structure around around any chart or graph. Use colors to draw attention. We share in here, there are color palettes that you want to consider for different uses. So a sequential palette is, kind of an example of what we see on top. It's a gradient of one color, right? And a sequential palette is really good for showing gradations of sort of one metric, if you will, or things on one scale. So for example, like, if we were graphing, well, the Strong Start Index is a good example. It's one index at 0 to 100. And so using a sequential palette, things on one sort of color scale are totally appropriate for that. Well, let's contrast this with a diverging color palette. So a diverging color palette is really appropriate for showing data that shows sort of two sides of a story. So two sides of an issue, two sides of a perspective. Actually a really good example, which I think y'all have probably seen this week. If we look at almost any sort of visual map-based presentation of polling results or of voting results, you'll always see those on some kind of diverging color palette where each major political party is shown in gradations on that palette. So that's one really common example of where you might use a diverging color palette. If you're collecting agree, sort of Likert scale data where you've got a scale from disagree to agree and a neutral point, that's another common use of a diverging palette. So just keep in mind, you can use colors, you should use colors, but use them thoughtfully and make sure that the colors don't distract. So the second really critical point for data visualization is that less is more. So you want to really edit down your chart and ask yourself, can a viewer understand the main point of this chart in 30 seconds or less? Ideally, can they understand the main point in 10 seconds or less? If not, there's probably a way to clarify this thing, to focus attention and to make your main point really clear. So I wanted to share an example. This is a California-based author. Storytelling with Data is one of the best books that I've read around data visualization. And so she shared this example, and it's not related to child maltreatment data, but it illustrates what we're talking about. So the left graph here and the right graph show the exact same data, but which one is more clear? The one on the right is definitely clear. You can understand exactly the point because the point is in the title. And so if nothing else, when you're thinking about data visualization, have the title of your chart expressing the main point. At the point that you're using data viz, you probably understand like what is the point you're trying to get across. Put that front and center, large text, the first thing people see, and then support that point with the data that lies underneath. Other differences that you all might see here. So on the left-hand graph, we've got several different colors. We've got a purple, we've got a teal, we've got a green. On the right-hand graph, we are using one color and we're focusing on that one thing. On the left-hand graph, we have a lot of grid lines. On the right-hand graph, we have fewer grid lines. So definitely ways of simplifying the presentation to focus attention on the main most important thing. Diana, thank you so much, by the way. I have not heard of this book before, Carissa Carter, The Secret Language of Maps. Sounds awesome. Thank you. Thank you again for sharing that. And in the data playbook too, I recognize there are a ton of awesome trainers around data communications. And what we're doing at best here is highlighting some of the few or most critical points that y'all can apply. But we link out to each of these different resources, including storytelling with data as one of those resources in the playbook itself. Awesome. Okay, so third point around data communications is you're going to use charts, you're going to use some kind of visual, you want to choose it wisely. So in the data playbook, we talk about a bunch of different kinds of data visualizations: tables, bar charts, dumbbell plots, slope charts, small multiples, pie charts. If anybody's ever heard of a Marimekko chart, and a lot of these can actually be really fun. And you want to use the right chart for the right purpose, and you need to keep your audience in mind. So in the data playbook, we kind of go over pros and cons of each of these. We actually show you examples. So here's for example, the dumbbell plot. Here is what this looks like. And what is the advantage of a dumbbell plot? If you are trying to really compare the same data points for two different groups, a dumbbell plot is awesome for that. So for example, if I were visualizing some polling data, I might, kind of compare an exit poll by folks who identify or vote Democrat versus Republican with a dumbbell plot. So each of these different charts has a unique purpose, has a particular purpose. And we kind of go into some of the different considerations in the actual document itself. So I won't give you too much detail here. If you are going through the process of creating a visual presentation of data, just read chapter 10. It'll give you some good pointers to integrate. And then the last point that we want to make related to data communications is that every time you are presenting data, you're really telling some sort of story, and you want to think about storytelling principles. So think back to when you were, I'm going to say in high school probably, and you were thinking about doing narrative writing. So you learned the arc of a story when you were probably in high school, and you can remember, we often start with sort of the inciting incident. We have sort of the setting, if you will, in a piece of narrative writing. We have sort of rising action in our plot. We tend to have a climax at some point in our story where there's a major turning point. There's falling action and then a resolution. So every story follows an arc that looks somewhat like this. If y'all have seen the hero's journey as a framework, that is a slightly more complicated version of pretty much the same thing. It is a kind of narrative arc. So whenever you're presenting data to your community, you want to think about this narrative arc and tie that into your presentation. So what does that actually look like? Often when I'm presenting data, I start with what is the context? What is the imperative for looking at community information? Who cares? And so you all are working on a prevention plan. You want to be able to tell the story of why do we need a comprehensive prevention plan? What are the constellation of different factors coming together that makes it important for our community to have one of these? Some of those might be the funding considerations. We've got a funding mandate for this plan, and many community members were already getting together and creating comprehensive prevention plans before other funding mechanisms were attached to them. So tell that story of why we came together to do this work. The rising action in a database story for this topic often involves working through your data framework, explaining what does your community look like? What are the particular challenges that we know based on our experience and based on the data our community is facing, and show that data. That takes us to sort of this climax, this opportunity for action. And so as you're kind of thinking about expressing the challenges that your community is facing, you want to quickly turn that to what is the plan? How are we thinking about addressing those? And in your resolution, be sure to identify what are the ways that community members can get involved or can act. So your presentations relating to data almost always result in some kind of call to action that is broader than just the data. It's like, how can people get involved in your prevention plan? What can they do to support your work going forward? How can they, take any or maybe get involved with any of the programming that you are launching? So think about, what is the call to action? That's going to vary based on audience too. We heard about many prevention planning teams using a structure like this to communicate with their board of supervisors, to advocate for more resources or better interdepartmental communication that helps make prevention work easier. So your data story obviously will take different forms based on your audience, your objectives, but definitely think about, what is the beginning of the story? What is the middle of the story? What is the end that includes some kind of call to action? So keep all those things in mind, as you're seeking to communicate your data. Ultimately, what I think is important to just remember that if you do all of this work above, if you've kind of gone through thinking about a framework, finding community data, collecting new data, analyzing it, you don't want to miss the opportunity to further engage your community, to get their support, because you'll need their support in actually executing your prevention plan by not communicating. There's a great opportunity based on all the work that y'all are doing right now to continue to engage and communicate with the rest of the folks in your community and bring other people that maybe don't even see themselves in child maltreatment prevention into this issue. So that was a sort of whirlwind tour of the prevention plan, the data playbook for prevention action planning. As Katie mentioned, you can find it here, economics.safeandsound.org/playbook. And I put this in here because go to this website, you can access the playbook, and there's also an executive summary. The executive summary is about 6 pages long, and it really almost think about it as a text version of this presentation, a little bit higher level, but it explains why this work is so important. So that executive summary can be helpful for folks who aren't doing the day-to-day work of data in your prevention planning team to just know what we're talking about. The data playbook itself will be helpful for anybody actually doing any part of this work. So wanted to just pause here. Any other questions coming up for folks before we wrap? And Katie, was there anything else that you wanted to share, as we're kind of wrapping up this conversation?
I really appreciate it. And I see Jason, I want to add a +1 to Jason Williams's comment. Caltran is excellent. We're very grateful to partner together on this work as we think about prevention in all of our communities. I also wanted to give another resource that I'll put into the chat. Safe and Sound has recently issued an issue brief called A Paradigm Shift from Mandated Reporting to Community Supporting. And it was really developed to initiate a dialogue and inform policymakers and stakeholders and counties that are in the process of comprehensive prevention planning about strategies to shift our system from mandated reporters to community supporters to keep families strong and to keep families together. And I'll put that resource in the chat. Maybe there's an opportunity for another session to come together and talk about some of the recommendations that we put together in that issue brief. But thank you so much, Paul. You make data fun. I love the data party. I love the arc of the data story, and the colors that you really bring together to show us all how can we thoughtfully review data and move our work around prevention planning forward. So ultimately together we can, and I'll say it again, strengthen families and end child maltreatment in our communities. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely, Katie. So, and the nice thing, everybody, so all these resources, including the new one that Katie mentioned, thank you, they're all the same website, economics.safeandsound.org. So couldn't be easier. Just remember that, and you can find all of this there. So, I don't want to give, end a presentation without a call to action. As I talked about, I need to practice what I preach. So your call to action, I want you to share the executive summary and or these slides with any other prevention planning stakeholders in your community that haven't already been exposed to this. And I know that some folks have, but definitely encourage you to just continue to get the word out, and you actually have all these slides. Haley, thank you for sharing them. For any team that is working through comprehensive prevention planning, if you haven't already, encourage at least one of those team members to actually read through this full data playbook. Really, we've talked about this enough here that you can probably zoom in on the section that's most relevant for your work right now. But we want to make sure that everybody's aware of this resource. Katie, thank you for mentioning community action and safeandsound.org. So that's a great way to be in touch with additional questions. And then the Caltrain team thoughtfully said, we should leave y'all with some reflection questions. And so we won't ask you to answer these here, but just as you're kind of integrating this information with everything else you're doing, think about, what is one area where we can integrate community data as we finish this comprehensive prevention plan? And secondly, are there any opportunities where we can use data as a basis for some planning conversations? I think that community engagement is so important. And as y'all are finishing your prevention plans, you're moving from this planning phase to the action phase. Community engagement is so important. You'll have data. I think there's opportunity to use that as a basis for continuing to engage in your community, and you're probably already doing some of this. So just think about those two questions as you move forward from here. So, economics at safeandsound.org, community action at safeandsound.org. Those are your resources. And with that, just have one wrap-up slide from Caltrain. So, Jessica, I'll turn it over to you to take us home.
Absolutely. And on behalf of the participants and the attendees today, we just want to thank the both of you for such thorough and awesome information. I'm sure we'll start to see the accolades come through the chat. Just want to remind all participants on this call that you do have an opportunity to receive a certificate of attendance today. That has been dropped into the chat now. So if you click that, there'll be a very brief survey followed by the opportunity to receive your certificate. You'll also receive a follow-up email with recordings and resources within the next 2 days to whichever email you registered with for this session. And lastly, of course, if you're not already linked to Caltrain through our newsletter, Caltrain Connect, it does give you the latest and greatest of these free and amazing presentations that are brought to you through funding. So thank you both again. So grateful to have you, and we look forward to having you back again.